The cane snapped like dry kindling under the weight of a boot, white, polished, and deliberate. Mrs. Laverne Jackson froze mid-step, her knuckles whitening around the broken handle still clenched in her palm. The world around her, already a blurred mosaic of shadows, seemed to still as the crunch echoed off the concrete of the downtown sidewalk. She didn't need sight to feel the chill in the air shift. The bustling street felt oddly quiet, onlookers halting, breath held, as though the city itself paused in disbelief. "I told you to step back," the officer's voice barked, sharp and void of empathy. Laverne's breath caught in her throat, her other hand trembling against the rough texture of the brick building beside her. Her only connection to the world, her cane, her freedom, lay in splinters at her feet. And she could hear it in his voice. No remorse, only power. But what that officer didn't know, what no one around her knew, was that her son, the man she'd raised on principles of justice and compassion, wore a badge too. And he wasn't just any officer. He was Captain Malik Jackson, and justice was about to come knocking. Laverne Jackson had always moved through the world with grace, even after the world had taken her sight. Born and raised in the heart of Montgomery, Alabama, she was the kind of woman whose presence softened hard days. Her voice, warm like Sunday morning gospel, carried wisdom and strength passed down through generations. She hadn't always been blind. For most of her life, she'd seen the world in vivid color, watched her son take his first steps, sat in front of a mirror smoothing down her curls before church, watched sunsets from her porch swing with a glass of sweet tea in hand. But diabetes came like a quiet thief in the night, slow and merciless. Within a few years, it had stolen her vision completely. Still, Laverne never allowed it to steal her dignity. She learned to navigate her neighborhood with her cane, counting steps, listening for landmarks. The crack in the sidewalk near the church, the scent of honeysuckle by Mrs. Whitmore's fence, the uneven curb outside Johnson's Market. The community knew her well. Miss Laverne, the woman with a smile you could hear before you saw it. She lived in a modest yellow house with blue shutters and a wraparound porch. Her son Malik had bought it for her when he made captain. "You gave me the world, Mama," he'd said, handing her the keys, his voice choked with gratitude. "Now let me give a little of it back." Malik Jackson was her pride, her miracle. She raised him on her own after his father was gunned down when Malik was just a toddler, an innocent caught in the crossfire of a gang dispute 2 blocks from their apartment. From that day forward, Laverne vowed her son would never fall through the cracks. She worked 2 jobs, taught him to pray when angry and speak truth even when it hurt. She raised him to see people not by the color of their skin, but the content of their actions. And when Malik said he wanted to be a cop, to change the system from the inside, she had prayed harder than she ever had in her life. Now, Captain Malik Jackson wore his badge with honor and humility. He was known for walking beats in his off hours, talking with youth, organizing food drives, and challenging misconduct within his own department. But Laverne never let his title change the way she treated him. "To me, you're still that boy who used to dance in his pajamas to Stevie Wonder," she'd say with a grin. Yet, despite her resilience, Laverne had her challenges. The city wasn't always kind to those who walked differently. And though she never spoke of it often, the quiet discrimination she faced, the careless bumps, the impatient sighs, the subtle mockery, was a constant shadow on her path. Still, she moved forward, one step at a time. Until that day when the cane broke. When something inside her cracked right along with it. It was a bright Tuesday morning, the kind Laverne usually welcomed with a soft gospel hum and the scent of jasmine from her porch planters. She had an appointment at the community clinic. Routine, nothing serious, and decided to walk. The sun warmed her skin, and she counted her steps as always, guided by the familiar tap-tap of her cane on the sidewalk. Downtown had changed over the years. New shops, new people, less patience. Still, she kept to her rhythm, stopping at intersections to listen for traffic and the chirp of crosswalk signals. She reached the busy corner of Franklin and Pine, a notoriously hectic intersection, and waited. But something felt off. A siren screamed a block away. A police cruiser swerved to a sharp stop near the curb, tires screeching. Laverne stiffened at the sudden chaos. She stepped back instinctively, trying to retreat from the commotion, but her cane caught on a crack in the pavement. She stumbled slightly, arms out. "Ma'am, step back," a voice barked. Harsh. Commanding. Before she could respond, before she could explain that she was blind, a hand gripped her elbow. Not gently. The cane was yanked from her grasp, and in an instant, the unmistakable snap echoed through the air. Gasps surrounded her. She could feel the tension like static. "Wait, please, I can't see," she cried out, one hand raised, the other reaching for the shattered cane pieces. The officer said nothing at first. There was only the crunch of a boot shifting and the low hum of murmurs from the growing crowd. "You were in the way," the officer finally said, devoid of apology. Tears welled in Laverne's eyes. Not from fear, but from humiliation. From being reduced to a problem. An obstacle. Not a person. A young woman stepped forward. "She's blind. You broke her cane. She wasn't doing anything." "Ma'am, back off," the officer snapped, now clearly agitated. Someone else pulled out a phone. The recording started. Laverne stood trembling, her world suddenly spinning without her grounding rod. And then, a familiar voice in the crowd, a deep, commanding voice that cut through the noise like a blade. "Is this how we treat the people we serve?" The crowd shifted. Captain Malik Jackson stepped into view, still in plain clothes, coffee in one hand, badge glinting on his hip. His eyes locked onto the cane fragment. Then onto the officer. Then onto his mother. For a moment, he didn't move. The weight of the scene pressed down on him, and everyone could see it. The realization, the conflict, the storm behind his calm. "Mom," he said softly, rushing to her side. She turned toward his voice, hand trembling as she reached for him. That moment, frozen in time, marked the beginning of a storm neither of them saw coming. Because now, it wasn't just about a broken cane. It was about breaking silence, and taking a stand. Laverne sat in her living room, fingers tracing the splintered edge of her broken cane laid carefully across her lap. She hadn't spoken much since the incident. Malik had brought her home, silent and fuming, and had offered to file a report immediately. But she had asked for space. "I need to breathe first, baby," she had said, her voice soft but steady. "And I need to think." It wasn't the first time she'd felt invisible. But it was the first time that invisibility had been so publicly enforced. She wasn't a threat, she wasn't even moving fast. She was simply there. And that, apparently, had been too much. The community buzzed with whispers, cell phone footage circulating online. Comments flooded in, some outraged, others dismissive. Some praised Malik for stepping in, others questioned his loyalty. And still, Laverne stayed quiet. But that silence was not weakness, it was reflection. She thought of all the years she'd taught Malik to walk with dignity, even when the world tried to shove him down. She remembered teaching him how to respond to ignorance not with anger, but with clarity and purpose. Now the time had come to take her own advice. Malik paced in his office, tension rolling off him like heat from asphalt. His badge felt heavier than usual. The officer involved, Officer Brent Harrow, was under internal review, but the wheels turned slowly, as they often did. Malik had filed an official complaint, but it was clear his involvement created complications. "He's your subordinate," the internal affairs officer reminded him. "We have to approach this carefully." "Carefully." Malik's voice rose. He snapped a blind woman's cane like it was a twig. "That blind woman being my mother. I understand, Captain. But protocol. Protocol didn't protect her," Malik snapped before storming out. Later that evening, he sat across from Laverne at her kitchen table. The silence between them was thick, but not empty. "I want to fight this, Mom. Take it to the media. Call for his termination. File charges." She sipped her tea slowly, the warmth of the cup steadying her. "I know you do. And I know why. She reached across the table, placing her hand on his. But if we go in guns blazing, we risk burning everything down. Even the good you've built. His jaw tightened. So what do we do? She tilted her head, considering. We speak. Not to tear down, but to build something better. Within days, Laverne agreed to share her story at a town hall meeting. The community center overflowed with people. Neighbors, activists, city officials, and police. Some were there to support, others to scrutinize. Laverne stood with Malik beside her, a new white cane in hand, donated by a local charity after hearing what happened. I'm not here to shame anyone, she began, her voice unwavering. But I am here to remind you that we are all human. And sometimes the systems we rely on forget that. She recounted the incident, not with bitterness but with clarity. Her words painted a picture not just of that day, but of the broader struggle, navigating a world not made for her, where independence was hard-won and too easily stripped away. I have lived a full life, she said, but I've also lived one where I've had to prove my worth every step. That day my cane was broken, but I've been broken before, and like every time before, I will rise again. The crowd rose to their feet. Malik stood in the back, heart pounding. He had never been more proud. But with pride came responsibility. Days turned into weeks. The department launched a formal inquiry, placing Officer Harrow on administrative leave. The media picked up the story. Laverne's quiet strength made headlines. She was invited to speak at disability advocacy forums, and local churches held prayer circles in her honor. But not everyone was supportive. Some officers saw Malik's stance as betrayal. Tension grew at the precinct. He was met with cold stares in the hallway, whispers behind closed doors. You picked her over us, one officer muttered when they passed in the locker room. She's my mother, Malik said firmly. And I picked what's right. Even his longtime partner, Officer Dina Morales, seemed distant. You sure you're not letting this get personal? She asked during a patrol. We've all had bad days out there. Maybe Harrow didn't know she was blind. She told him. People in the crowd told him, Malik replied, jaw tight. That excuse might work for someone else. Not me. You're shaking the whole department. Maybe the department needs to be shaken. Meanwhile, Laverne faced her own internal battle. The incident had robbed her of something intangible, confidence. For weeks, she hesitated to leave the house alone. The memory of the boot, the crack, the helplessness, lingered like a bruise that refused to fade. One afternoon, her neighbor, little Corey from next door, knocked on her screen door. Miss Laverne? You okay? She smiled, softening. I'm all right, baby. Just taking it easy. He hesitated. My mom said that cop was mean to you. She said you're brave. Laverne blinked back tears. Did she now? Corey nodded. I drew you a picture. He handed her a crayon drawing, a stick figure woman with a white cane, a bright sun, and a badge-wearing figure beside her. That's you, he said. And that's your son. She ran her fingers over the paper, the waxy ridges of crayon lines. In that moment, something inside her shifted. She wasn't broken. She was a symbol. She resumed her walks a week later. Step by step, with her new cane tapping confidently, she retraced her route downtown. A few people recognized her and offered gentle nods, words of encouragement. Outside Johnson's Market, a woman stopped her. Miss Laverne? She asked. Yes, ma'am. I saw your speech on Facebook. You reminded me to speak up for my daughter. She's autistic. The world forgets people like her sometimes. Thank you. Laverne placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. Keep speaking. Even when it feels like no one's listening. In the following months, Malik launched a department-wide initiative, Project Watchtower, a training and awareness program for officers to better interact with disabled individuals and marginalized communities. He brought in guest speakers, disability advocates, and trauma experts. He insisted on making the first session mandatory. Pushback came hard. But he stood his ground. "This is about humanity," he said at the first meeting. "And if we wear this badge, we owe it to the people to meet them with compassion." Laverne was the keynote speaker at the first seminar. She stood at the podium, facing rows of officers, some skeptical, others curious. "I am not your enemy," she began. "But if your fear of difference makes you see me as one, then I am your mirror." There was silence, then a slow ripple of applause. Officer Morales approached her afterward. "I was wrong," she said. "You made me think." "Thank you." But the greatest test came when the disciplinary board reached a decision. Officer Harrow was not fired, but he was suspended without pay, required to undergo disability sensitivity training, and reassigned to community outreach for 6 months. Some called it a slap on the wrist. Others called it progress. Malik brought the news home, his expression unreadable. "It's not perfect," he said. "But it's a start." Laverne smiled, reaching for his hand. "You've changed more than you know. Sometimes change doesn't roar. Sometimes it walks quietly and keeps walking." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You walk well, my son." Malik blinked back emotion. "And you stand taller than anyone I've ever known." The night of the city council meeting arrived with the weight of something larger than policy or politics. It carried the promise of reckoning. A proposed resolution was on the table, a new citywide protocol for how law enforcement interacted with disabled citizens, inspired in part by Laverne's case and Project Watchtower. If passed, it would mandate specialized training, accountability procedures, and include community liaisons in future misconduct reviews. It was unprecedented and controversial. The chamber was packed. Citizens filled every seat, cameras rolled in the back, reporters whispered updates into microphones. Police in uniform lined the side walls, some tense, others watching with interest. The mayor, the council members, and Malik stood at the front, the pressure of the moment pressing down like a storm cloud. But the room's attention was fixed on one figure, Laverne Jackson. She rose slowly from her seat with the help of her cane, tapping carefully as she approached the podium. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the magnitude of what this moment meant. Her son sat in the front row, eyes locked on her, heart pounding in his chest. She paused, breathed deeply, and began. "When I lost my sight, I didn't just lose vision, I lost control. I had to relearn how to exist in a world that wasn't built for me. A world that rarely makes room for people like me, people who move differently, live differently, speak differently." Her voice strengthened as she continued. "But I adapted. I survived. And I believed, in my bones, that people are good. That even in a broken world, kindness can find a way. That belief was shaken the day my cane was broken. Not because of the pain or the humiliation, but because it reminded me how quickly dignity can be stolen when power is unchecked." She paused, the room silent except for the hum of the overhead lights. "But tonight, I'm not here as a victim. I'm here as a witness, to resilience, to justice, and to the power of choice. We can choose to protect the vulnerable. We can choose to teach, to listen, to grow." She turned her head slightly, though she couldn't see him. "Captain Jackson, my son, made a choice. He chose truth over comfort, justice over loyalty. And tonight, I ask this council to make a choice too." A hush fell as she lowered her head and stepped back. Then, the mayor leaned forward, voice gravelly with emotion. "Thank you, Mrs. Jackson." The vote began. One by one, hands rose. I. Until. All in favor, motion passed. Cheers erupted in the chamber. Applause thundered, some standing, some weeping quietly. Malik's breath left him in a shuddered release as he stood and wrapped his arms around his mother. "You did it," he whispered. "No, we did," she replied. "And so did everyone who refused to stay silent." Outside, cameras flashed as they exited the building. Reporters swarmed, but Malik held up a hand. "Tonight isn't about a headline. It's about a future where people like my mother don't have to be broken to be seen." And in the center of it all stood Laverne, cane in hand, chin lifted to the stars, her dignity not just intact, but radiant. The weeks following the council vote felt like sunrise after a long, stormy night. The Jackson Protocol, as it became unofficially known, rolled out across the city. Officers, dispatchers, and city employees gathered in sessions where they learned not only about disability sensitivity but about humility, humanity, and the power of presence. It was no longer just a checkbox. This was training rooted in lived experience, in empathy, in truth. Laverne stood at the heart of it all. Though she'd never asked for the spotlight, it found her, and this time, it offered more than pity. It offered respect. She was invited to speak at universities, faith conferences, even national advocacy events. Her voice, once confined to church choirs and kitchen tables, now echoed across auditoriums and city chambers. Not because she was loud, but because she was honest. And that honesty resonated. Despite the national attention, she remained Laverne from the block. She still rose early to tend her jasmine plant. She still listened to gospel records with the volume low and the meaning high. And every Friday she and Malik shared dinner, just like they always had. At one of those dinners, over collard greens and cornbread, Malik asked, "You ever think we'd end up here?" Laverne chuckled softly. "Where's here, baby?" He gestured with his fork. "You, changing city policy. Me, walking that tightrope between justice and duty." She smiled, tilting her head. "You were always walking it. Since you were a boy. Remember that time you came home crying because a teacher accused you of cheating on that math test?" "Mrs. Lambert," Malik muttered, groaning. "I still remember," she said. "No way a black boy from this zip code scores that high," Laverne said, the words still sharp in her memory. "You didn't yell. You didn't fight. You asked her to let you retake the test. And you scored even higher." Malik looked down, heart tight. "You've always known who you are, Malik. That's why you're there. That's why people follow you. Not because you're perfect, but because you're anchored." He looked up, eyes soft. "And you're the anchor." She reached across the table, hand finding his. "We're each other's." At the precinct, things began to shift. Officer Morales became a fierce advocate for the new training, volunteering to lead workshops and share her own learning curve. "I used to think empathy made you weak," she admitted at one session. "Turns out it's the only thing that makes us strong." Even Officer Harrow, after months of community outreach and mentorship with disabled veterans, returned with a different posture. He approached Laverne quietly at an event one evening, his uniform crisp but his eyes unsure. "Mrs. Jackson," he said. She turned slightly toward his voice. "I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed to say. I didn't see you. I mean, I saw you, but not as a person. That was wrong. I've learned since then. And I'm still learning." Laverne listened, silent for a long moment. "I believe in change," she finally said. "But not just for others. For all of us." He nodded, eyes glistening, then stepped away. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was a beginning. The broader community changed, too. Local schools introduced empathy training, using Laverne's story as part of their curriculum. Students with disabilities started sharing their experiences in classrooms, emboldened by her example. Parents wrote letters. One read, "Because of you, my daughter isn't afraid to use her white cane anymore. She calls it her sword of light." The church community that raised Laverne honored her with an award, Pillar of Light. The pastor, with tears in his eyes, said, "Sometimes God sends us a storm. But sometimes He sends us someone who learns to dance in the rain, and teaches the rest of us how to walk through it." But perhaps the most profound change happened quietly, far from any stage. One afternoon, Laverne stood on her porch, cane resting beside her as she soaked in the sounds of spring, children playing, birds in the trees, a breeze stirring her hair. Across the street, Corey, her young neighbor, rode his bike in circles, stopping occasionally to wave. "Miss Laverne," he shouted. You want to see my new trick? She laughed. You know I can't see it, baby. But go ahead, I'm listening. He whooshed past, mimicking race car sounds, then called back. Did you hear it? I sure did, she called. Sounded like the wind got jealous. His laughter echoed and she smiled to herself. Malik pulled up minutes later, stepping onto the porch with groceries in hand. You look peaceful, he said. I am, she replied. For the first time in a long while, I feel seen. Not because something terrible happened, but because something beautiful came after. He sat beside her, letting the silence stretch. I want to expand the program, he said finally. Take it statewide. Maybe even national. She nodded slowly. Then you'll need someone to speak for it. He raised a brow. Are you volunteering? She turned her head toward him, a sly grin forming. I thought I already did. They laughed together, the kind of laugh that comes after a storm, deep, cleansing, real. The moral was never about revenge. It was about recognition, about seeing each other, truly seeing, and choosing to act from that place. It was about the strength it takes to stay soft in a hard world, about speaking up not to destroy but to transform. Laverne didn't set out to change the system. She set out to survive it. But in doing so, she lit a path others could follow. Not by fighting fire with fire, but by being the light. 2 years later, Laverne stood at the steps of the state capitol, her hand wrapped around her now signature cane, sleek, reinforced, and shimmering with a small brass engraving that read, Strength Seen. Beside her stood Malik, no longer just a local precinct captain but the newly appointed director of community policing for the state. Together, they were preparing to announce the launch of Vision Forward, a statewide initiative rooted in the principles of accessibility, empathy, and public accountability. What began with one incident had grown into a movement, one that was reshaping how justice was understood and delivered. News outlets had come, but this time the story wasn't about a broken cane or broken trust. It was about what had been rebuilt. Laverne spoke briefly, her voice calm, yet full of conviction. We are all walking blind in some way. Some of us learn to listen better because of it. Some of us learn to lead. But the real victory is when we all learn to walk together, different but equal. The crowd rose in applause, not just for her, but for what she represented, a testament to what courage, compassion, and persistence could achieve. Later, as the sun dipped behind the Capitol dome, Laverne and Malik sat on a bench overlooking the city. Do you think people will remember? Malik asked. Laverne smiled gently, turning her face toward the warmth of the setting sun. They won't remember the headlines, but they'll remember how it felt when the world got a little kinder. And somewhere, a child picked up their first cane, not with shame but with pride. A symbol, not of weakness but of power reclaimed. The future had seen the light, and chose to follow it.